So, hi everyone. Welcome to CocoaHeads, January CocoaHeads. Good to have you here at Scout 24. Hopefully everyone got enough to drink, pizza, etc. First what I'd like to do is just give an introduction to Scout and what we do here and how we work and why it's an awesome place to work. So if you've probably met some of these people up here, they're around. And this is a large part of my team. This is not the only iOS developers that we have here, but these are the people that are here tonight. So what's it like working at Scout 24? So we ship our code to a lot of people. Like this is, I think, one of the coolest things that we get out of releasing an app or releasing a version. We have 1.8 million monthly active users just on iOS, and then there's 20 million total for the web, Android, and iOS combined. So it's a lot of people. You are probably familiar with the app. It's just Emo Scout in the App Store, and it's probably some. If you've moved to Berlin from somewhere else, it's probably something that you've used to find a flat or find any kind of accommodation like in Berlin. So why is it cool? I would say also because you get some recognition. I mean, we are the #1 in mobile real estate search in Germany. We have our 3 platforms. We have a lot of brand recognition, a lot of name recognition, and like it says here, like you will see somebody using the app. You probably have used the app yourself. That's a really cool feeling. It's something that makes me proud whenever I see somebody on the U-Bahn using something that I've shipped and like features that I know. So that's really cool. But really, like, we're looking for engineers, but we don't just want great engineers. We want people who are caring about the product, something that you don't really see in a lot of other like larger companies. And this is because of the way that our teams are divided up, and our product teams and our engineering teams are working because they're working in squads, etc. But like we are really integrated like as engineers into the product planning process and a lot of the feature development, which is really great because it doesn't mean you're just closing tickets. You're not just trying to get your PRs in and then go home or whatever, and then not have anything to do with the way that the product that you work on is formed. So that's really cool. Of course, that's optional, but it's something that we really stress. But yeah, of course, we use like latest technologies definitely with our iOS app. We're using, of course, Swift, modern build systems, modern tooling, modern hardware, etc. So it's another benefit. Also, what we offer is like we have a place for you to go. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here. I mean, this is like something that I really appreciate. I've worked in startups in Berlin and elsewhere, and there's really like, you kind of feel like maybe you're stuck, maybe there's nowhere for you to go to advance your career, etc. But like here, man, you can do like really anything you want. If you want to change your direction, if you want to change the type of work you're doing or the people you're working with, there's always something to do. If you want to move up, that's really great. We are always looking for somebody who's interested in doing that. So that's cool. Of course, our perks, we have a lot of them. You can just read them, but I would say like there's a lot of different various cool things that we have here at Scout that I think do differently. I mean, I would say, I didn't mention it on here, but like I would say really like the team organization is really fantastic. We're really definitely working well with heads of technology, even like our CTO, and they're very present, and it doesn't feel like, well, at least for me and my team, like it really doesn't feel like you're walled off from this, from like the people who are really making like important decisions. So that's really cool. But yeah, like other things, of course, like salary is really great. We do get 30 days of vacation, budgets for conferences, etc. We do something that's actually coming up next week. It's a hack week, which is where we can work on our own ideas, work on our own things that we feel like will benefit the company or are just interesting to do. And this can be really anything that you want that's kind of related to like we have like themes, etc. But so it depends on each hack week. But it's a really cool feature of working here. So that's it. But like, if you want to talk to any of us, we are hiring. We're constantly hiring. We'd love to have you. We'd love to talk, and we can get that started tonight or whenever you want. So thanks a lot. So I would now like to present. Yeah, it's a bit bright, sorry. There's no like, everyone's used to like using dark mode. This is not dark mode. So I'd like to talk with you today about something that we've introduced about a year ago at Scout and our iOS team, and that's basically what we're calling features as frameworks. And how this is how you can make your development process a lot more pleasurable, a lot more easy to use, etc. And so let's get started. So iOS at Emo Scout is like really big. Like, I mean, we have it is actually a very old app. It's been around for 8 years. We do have a lot of code, and it is a lot. There are a lot of people contributing to this code base. It's very intense. So this is probably, as you know, if you have a lot of code, it means you have a lot of things that come along with it. It can be a hassle. So like, our problem has been always really long build times. I mean, this is especially apparent with Swift. Like, this is something I would say, personally, this is like one of my least favorite things about starting to develop in Swift. I mean, the language is great, but because of all the features that it has, it's very heavy on time and processing power. And so we really have like, I mean, it can be like up to 10 plus minutes from a full clean. That means like full derived data, delete, etc., which you may have to do. I mean, everyone has to do it from time to time. And then, like, depending on where you are in the main app module, I mean, it's going to be like half a minute is like amazing if that's the case. But like up to like 3 minutes for like a small change, especially if you're working on Swift. Objective-C, not so much, but we're not working in Objective-C anymore except for maintenance. So another thing that we have is like there's kind of unclear boundaries in the code, and this means like that because if you have one module, even if you really organize your code well, I mean, there can sometimes be here and there things get used or reused in a way that like maybe isn't appropriate, or is just using something that just to kind of get it done, or to reuse functionality without having to copy and paste, whatever. I mean, it happens. And so, like, for that reason, bad habits can form pretty easily. It's something that we experienced before. Also, when you have a huge code base, it is really daunting to onboard new developers. Like, having a new developer come in that doesn't know anything about it, and like has to go in and really understand a lot of this code base all at once is it's a big task, and it's also just maybe even if you keep that developer focused in one area, it's still like very daunting. So this is a big problem with such an app. So like, we said that this is enough. Like, personally, I had it with the build times. That's just like totally not something that I wanted to tolerate anymore. So we really can't have this big monolithic module, and it's just not something we can stand. So we had to decide on a couple of guidelines, because you can't really do this, you can't attack the code that you already have. It's just not a good approach, especially when you're testing out some kind of new approach to coding. So we started with a new feature. And the goal was also to like learn how to use iOS frameworks in a way that made sense, and so that we could really understand the framework feature before we refactored old code. And really also to determine if like this was going to solve our problem. We weren't really sure that this is like really an answer, or if it's going to be too difficult or whatever. And also, of course, to make sure that everyone was on board with this thing, and that it was something that people were comfortable doing for going forward. Yeah, and like I said, like we don't want to break old stuff. So we started with a feature that you probably, like if you open the iOS app right now, this is the very first thing that you'll see on the main screen of the app. This is the home feed. And this would be, or this currently is, the main screen where we display personalized content to our users based on like their search patterns and like other factors. This is where we can show them the relevant content that they want to see during their apartment search. So the important thing that we started with was like having just enough scope to like really make it a sensible feature to start in this direction. So really, we had understood the scope very well at first. The designs were very well done. The product team was finished with their first iteration and how they would do it. It was mostly a UI layer, which means like we have it wasn't heavy on like lots of other network logic or like data storage or anything like that. It was not just this UI layer that was the first or the main part of this code. And like a single public entry point, and that means that we had like one view controller. So like we could really say like the start of this feature and like where you can access the entirety of the feature is through one view controller, and that made it really easy to integrate into the app in the future. And the components inside the framework were not shared between other, like we weren't going to reuse those. For example, like if you look back here, we have these feed cards. These ones down here are, oh, this doesn't really work. These right here, or these feed cards, like we were never going to use them like elsewhere in the app. So that was another important thing because it made it easier to really isolate the code. So how did we kind of start with this? This is like kind of the way that it looked now, or like looked before we began this. I mean, we have like tons of different things. Like I said, it's a single module. There's really no. There was definitely like, I would say there's definitely like sort of modularity in the code for sure. I mean, it's not like total spaghetti mess, but we had a lot of things that were shared, like a lot of things that really didn't need to be in the way that they were. And these are like a lot of the features that are crucial to like our search funnel. So what we would do is kind of like we would make a separate target, this feed.framework, and then kind of vend it out to the app, like just like you would a sort of an API or any other SDK that you would see, or you would consume it just like an SDK that you maybe get from CocoaPods or really like a closed source sort of framework. But this would include like all of our protocols, and then like of course the main view controller that we would use as the entry point, and then inside this framework project we would include all of these things that were external also to the feed framework, which is like UI tests and unit tests, and then of course all the resources needed to make the framework work. So when we were approaching this, and we started with it, like the very first day you made this the feed.xcode project, it just looked like this. I mean, we had this we had three projects rather, inside this Xcode workspace. This is just our main app module, of course pods, which we're using to manage our dependencies, and the feed itself. And this Xcode project just lived inside of a directory called internal frameworks that was in the root of our app directory that was completely version controlled in the same way as the main app, meaning like when you checked in code to the feed, and it would then be checked, it would just be checked in as a piece of code in the normal app module. So this made it like much less complicated to manage, to do all of the version controlling, and also you could see the version history for the module itself along with the changes to the main app module. This is actually really important because like if you've used CocoaPods before and you've had to like version things and like jump in versions, you have to like kind of sync on it in a way that's very frustrating. I'll get to that in a bit, but this is like a really big improvement in our development process. So yeah, we just added this feed Xcode project to the workspace, just like you would pods or any other thing. and then it was part of it could be accessed by the Emo Scout Wohnen main module. So, yeah, like I said, we had just these 3 targets, but the unit test, the feed itself, and the feed, and this was the way that we would do most of our development is having a single view demo app that only accessed the entry point, the main view controller entry point. So that means it could load everything that you needed to show the feed, to use mock data, etc. This would be started by the feed demo app. And this meant that we could really only build what we're working on. And this is so important because when you're building an iOS app, you're so often, because of the way that the Swift modules, or that Swift compartmentalizes the way that it compiles its code means that you can access, or you can change something in the tree of the compiled source tree that would be would mean you'd have to recompile a lot of code in order to get this whole thing built. So you would have just this only this one module that would be built when you've made changes. So this also meant that when we were running this demo app, we could load all the mock data from a file. The file could easily be changed. It's just a JSON file. It's basically a mock response that we would get from the endpoint that we would use. And we could tweak it. Everything was very easily tweaked and would of course appear in the simulator in seconds. And even after the feature is finished, this entire project can be built in 50 seconds from a total delete of derived data. And it's a pretty big feature. So that was really amazing. It was just really a pleasure to work with, and it was something that really had a lot of positive effects on our development process. Yeah, I mean, and the positive effects were less distractions during development. I mean, everyone's probably familiar with this. I mean, if you haven't worked on a big app, this is really I can't stress it enough, terrible. So yeah, we didn't have to do the whole delete derived data thing, and even if we did have to, it wasn't that painful. It wasn't really that big of a deal because, hey, it's only going to take a maximum 1 minute. I don't even have time to get a coffee, so whatever. And then, of course, you can just change mock data, and it's very simple and straightforward to do that. So this was a really big success. We loved this approach. Our team really loved it. It was great. It was actually really nice to have existing developers come onto or move onto this code base and try it out after having worked on the main module and be damn, that is really fast. I'm really happy to be using this. It was really a great thing that people really loved. So we started building a lot more of our features as frameworks, and we kind of have the knowledge now in our team of how to do that and why it's important, etc. And we set up our CI testing as well for these framework targets, and that's managed using Fastlane. It's a bit tricky, but I get to that in a sec. And the biggest thing, another big thing too, was that our coding habits improved, which I'll also get to in a sec. So now we have 9 frameworks. We have a ton of features now. I mean, and some of them aren't even features. For example, now we have we've had to divide a little bit the project into some shared things that are shared between frameworks. So data objects, for example, just our models, some of these are actually internal pods that we moved to use as frameworks, which was also, that's kind of how I'm familiar with this bumping version, etc. But yeah, and then but a lot of these are just UI. Location input is when you go on the search screen and you tap the top bar where you start entering location. I mean, that's just loading a framework, loading a view controller from a framework, and we keep making more. So everyone loves it. So build times, we already know how awesome that is. But we have a lot of other positive features, or positive impacts that this approach was making. really what we found was like this isolation was super good. Like it really forced us to think about like how do we make like a kind of more like an API. Like we need to not use concrete classes, and like we need to really leverage, like the only way to actually make this work is by using protocol-oriented programming. Like you really have to do that because otherwise it's not possible to test, to do like effective unit tests, or to really kind of vend out the framework interface to an external module, meaning the main app. So this was really cool. We also found that this was this really like this made a lot of discussion happen around it. Like when we were talking about the code in a code review or whatever, like the developers were much more engaged into like, okay, should this really be public? Like, shouldn't you set the access level to be different than it is? Is this really like kind of a method name that's going to be able to be used in maybe multiple parts of the app, or is this something that you should use like a generic because we have like maybe we have two types that we need to that needs to be handled by this interface. And like you should be doing this already. Like you should really. It's not to say that like this is like the only way to kind of make this happen, but like it really forces you to do it, which I think is really great because by default you just kind of have to. Another thing that we really found was awesome was that onboarding was made really easy. So like we have hired several new engineers since starting this, and it's really great to be able to just give the new developer a task that is only isolated to this or a specific framework, and they don't have to really worry too much about like all these other dependencies and all this stuff that you would normally have to do when you onboarded people. So like, I mean, it should be that that they would get that experience eventually, of course, but like it's not as scary. Like it's not as big of a thing. And also if you have like, for example, external people, maybe contractors who are only working there for 3 months or whatever, and this is like what they're hired to do, that's really important. So they can just like not be concerned too much with the internal workings of like the main app module, etc. So another thing that's not like totally a feature as a framework was, but it also just kind of came out of our experience doing this, was like really figuring out what to do with CocoaPods, with our internal CocoaPods. Because it was also another pain point. It was also something that we really had trouble with during our development process. So like you guys probably, if you have any internal CocoaPods, you're probably really familiar with this. You code some changes, update the version numbers, tag, create a directory with the new version number, make sure everything is pushed, update the pod file, pod install, repo update, and then realize something you forgot, and then they have to go and fix it. So like this is really annoying. This is a huge drag, and there's no reason to really do this unless you're like really providing a framework that like other people other than your main app is using. So this we replaced this by moving all the CocoaPods to frameworks, and this was like kind of a bit of a task. I mean, it was because it's obviously, I mean, CocoaPods is actually building a framework anyway, but like it's doing a bunch of other special stuff. So we had to do a little bit of work to make this happen, but it really wasn't such a big deal. So I mean, like when we're doing it now, because it's checked in as a normal, as like a normal piece of code in the Git repo, we just code some changes, commit changes, and push changes, and then we remember how much it kind of sucked using CocoaPods. So. Yeah, so that was awesome. But you might be wondering like, okay, what's the downsides? Why would not everyone not use this or whatever in there if they had a huge app? Yeah, I mean, you got less time. That's all. No, really, but seriously, like it's a little bit tricky to set these up. Like you have to really like know how to. You kind of have to like. There's a little bit of a learning curve. I mean, it's not serious, but it's something that needs to be done. And this is, I would say, like the biggest kind of disadvantage is when you move components that have to be shared between frameworks, and you find that in your, like, for example, you find like a, let's say like a UI component, like a label that's used all across your app, and it's really like it's standard, or you discover that it's something that's going to be reused. Moving it from and it's in the main app module, moving it from the main app module out to the the new framework that you're using is a bit tricky. And sometimes you may have to move it to like another framework, like your UI, your common UI framework or something like that. It's just a little bit tricky, and then it requires a little bit of integration and extra work, like in the refactoring in the main app module. So. But really, it's not such a big deal. And then there's like a slight overhead of having to develop in this like API mode. Like you're really, it's not, because it's like forcing you to really be careful about like the way that you design your API and the way that you use protocols, et cetera. You may do things that you wouldn't do if you were just kind of like going at it, like really trying to get something done, et cetera. So that's kind of a disadvantage. I mean, you're going to get better code quality though. So I'd say that's pretty good side effect. Also, like new CI, the CI is something that you need to take care of, and that's not such a big deal if you're like already using Fastlane. But like, for example, if you had like a lot of, if you were kind of like running build lanes manually, like not as automated from like Jenkins or from TeamCity or something like that, it could be a little bit tricky to set up. I mean, Fastlane is definitely worth using. For that. So, but if you're in that situation, it could be a little easy or not so easy to set up. So that's it. Thanks for listening. So, questions? Oh yeah, and we have microphones. Lucas, can you pass this? Oh. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Is it working?
Oh, shit. Thanks. So my question is, since you're working with GitHub, do you have any like publicly available how-to
on
GitHub, like a README that explains you how to implement the way you are coding these frameworks and integrating them into each other? Like
you
a
mean
guideline?
like as a public thing?
Yeah. Like someone.
No, but we should. We should. Yeah.
Yeah, like I want to learn that. I'll go home tonight and I'll look up and see there's no resource on that.
I mean, actually, as part of this talk, I was writing up something for this, and I hope to have it done soon, because it's like I said, tricky.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's in the making then.
Sorry.
So
yes,
it's in the making.
Yes,
and we can expect something.
Yes.
That's cool.
Thanks.
Can I ask one? Hi.
Oh, you're next. Yeah.
So one question: when you started with all of this, you said you had compilation time like 10 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Did you ever measure like which language features of Swift took the most time to compile in your app?
Yes, actually, what ended up being like a lot of it wasn't actually I had measured it earlier on, like so a couple years ago, and so at the time it was actually not Swift, but it was like macros, like I can't remember this library name, but it's like a thing that does the weakify, strongify. It's like a lot of macros that are inserted into the code during compile time. So that was actually the first thing. But yes, we do that now, where we check to see, we profile the build and make sure that like if it's something that is taking a long time and maybe we don't need to build it, or maybe we don't need it actually, we can just remove it. Like in the currently we're removing the cartography. That's the one, because it really has like a ton of generics that are just maybe too much for us anyway. Or yeah, so we did do the analysis.
Hello. So nice talk. I have two questions. One, you mentioned that you have been using internal pods for some code. Why didn't you consider using development pods instead of frameworks?
I mean, you mean it's like keeping them in the same repo and just linking them directly?
And just save yourself the hassle of linking frameworks and the tricky part you mentioned, because development pods will basically do that for you.
Yeah, no, you have a good point. I mean, that actually would solve the problem. I've used that before. The CocoaPods were set up like before I came and before we started thinking about this problem, and they were really like divided up into different repos. So that's kind of why. I mean, we could have moved them, sure. But
They will still come with some issues.
yeah,
of course.
and also like this is the thing is it's the thing that I like personally about this approach compared to CocoaPods is just like this is something that's like natively available in Xcode and in the native build system. So it's like it's supported really well, and it's very clean.
So taking it from the native to my next question, how do you manage dependencies to third-party frameworks into your frameworks, like your feature frameworks?
Good question. Yeah. So the way that we do that is basically by having, you still have to have like one pod file, and for the entire, a pod file actually targets a workspace. I mean, most of the time we're just using it, we're like one Xcode project, but it targets a workspace. And so you can create a new, you can also, in addition to targeting the main app module, you can also target Xcode projects anywhere in the project directory. So so what we needed to do was like we included, basically what we did was we defined a variable in our pod spec or our pod file, and then that variable included all of the pods that were needed for a module, and then we would import or we would add that variable to the dependency definition in both the main module and in the framework module, because like you have to because the main module is building everything and then linking everything together. You have to have all the dependencies for your framework in the main module so that the linker can do its job. It's not enough. I mean, you can't in iOS. You can't do you can't like package your dependencies along with it. So. Someone else?
Yeah, I think what missed is how do you connect those modules together? Have you developed some kind of navigation framework to assemble them all together, or is it just a legacy part of your code base? So you just extract it one by one, and there is still some legacy part which assembles everything together.
I'm not. If I understand your question correctly, you want to know like how do we make it so that they are like these modules are all somehow connected?
So you have multiple screens. You need to set up somehow the navigation between.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah. Just to be clear, like we didn't get rid of our main app module. This was just a way to like move forward. So the main app module is actually starting, for example, like this feed framework target. Our view controller, like it loads the view controller itself, and that is the navigation. And then like any navigation that we need inside these frameworks is done like inside the framework. I mean, it's done. I mean, using just a UI navigation controller, which is friendly to that kind of like modularization. So like, yeah, to be clear, we didn't get rid of our main app module. The main app module is still there. There's a lot of old crusty code in there, definitely for sure. But like, this is a way of like us being able to move forward and not have to touch that like so much.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm assuming you're using dynamic frameworks, right?
Yes.
So did you experience any slowdown in the start of when starting the app, and maybe an increased footprint of the size?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we did not because like so what happens when the framework when the app starts is that right now we're just loading all the frameworks, and so there is an increased startup time. We could be really smart and do like a dynamic loading, like when things are actually accessed, which really we should do. But and it's actually quite easy to do. I don't know. We should just haven't done it. But yes, there is a slight overhead as far as like loading the dynamic loader to perform this operation. So.
And size-wise, doesn't include a lot of symbols and so on that maybe not.
No, I mean no more than you would just normally have. I mean it's normal.
Okay. First, thanks for the talk. It's been one of the most useful in the recent history of CocoaPods,
Wow, thank you.
of CocoaHeads, at least for me. And I've used frameworks before, but what I haven't done yet is like using Swift frameworks from Objective-C code. So are there any special gotchas I need to watch out for?
I mean, if you're no, like I mean, I mean, there is not any that I can think of at the moment because it's really just like packaged as.
So if I have like Objective-C code and I want to call like a method from a Swift framework.
Yeah, now I'm like, see, like, I thought I had a really good answer to that, but now I'm like doubting myself. But maybe, but no, we don't have any problems doing that. Like we use, like actually the feed framework is loaded using an Objective-C, like an Objective-C piece of code. So it's generating the Objective-C interface just fine. Okay. So.
If I may to add to your answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
When Objective-C and Swift code gets compiled by the CLang compiler, it is packaged as a CLang module. And so the module is also like a header file. It publishes the interface. Every class or type that you declare as public or open, it's going to be accessed from the Objective-C code. But some Swift types are not accessible in Objective-C, like enumerations and some other things. But generally, it's working like it should be.
Yes, actually, good point. Because yeah, you need to do the Objective-C definitions, or they use the Objective-C decorator and like follow the same rules as you do code. Yeah, so like no enums, no generics, etc.
One last question, and let's move the. This was the first. Let's move then the conversation up.
Yeah.
Hi. How do you handle cyclic dependencies between frameworks? Like a framework need another one to initialize it, and that one needed the first one. So how you handle this?
Yeah. Well, so because of the way that frameworks are used in iOS or in this in like the framework loader, I mean, you don't have that problem because you're defining all of the dependencies like basically at the main app module level. So like you can, if the framework is there and is already linked, like you don't have this issue where one should depend on another because it's like it is all on the same like level, I suppose. But like, let's see, we shouldn't. But in general, like the dependencies aren't architected like that. I mean, in our current way of managing our frameworks, we use like kind of like a tree. But so we haven't had that problem yet. I don't think that like we shouldn't have that problem. I mean, I think I would call it like kind of a problem of like putting your of like the scope of the framework if that came up. But maybe we would have this problem. So yeah. So that's it, I think. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.